Okay, boys and girls, it's time for another chapter with Jack and Annie. Before we get started and into the reading, though, let's think about as you are reading, and this applies to your writing too when you are writing stories. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the beginning is usually kind of slow. It introduces you to your characters. It introduces you to the setting. It introduces you to the plot, where they're going to go. You get to know the characters' emotions and their traits and things that help move the story along. We have started and we've been introduced to Jack and Annie. We've been introduced to the Professor Henry. We've been introduced to the captain and to the other Professor Moseley. I have to remember. And we have seen that they started off by just a nice laid out that Professor Henry is on an adventure. He's looking for a specific shell, and he goes on these expeditions on this big ship. And Jack and Annie have now gotten aboard the big ship, but the captain wants them off. But before they go, the waves start to change. And as you can see, we are now climbing up the hill in our story. We're still kind of in the beginning, but we're going to climb on up. And when we reach the top of that peak, that's the climax. That's where the big adventure comes to a whoa, and how are they going to solve this terrible, terrible problem? So we are going to watch Jack and Annie and see if they get into trouble, because remember, where we ended the last time, Jack had just gotten thrown off of the ship and he was in the water. And remember, they're back in the 1870s, and so their vests were these cork vests, and they're not as good as they are today in today's era. So we see Jack and Annie. Annie's probably very worried about her brother, and Jack is in this ocean being tossed around. So get your sticky notes. Get your scratch paper. Be sure to be writing down your wonderings and your questions and see if you can find the answers to those questions as we continue to read. Listen to your vocabulary word for Chapter 7. And let's see where we're going to leave off here and get going with our next chapter. Help. Well, the title is going to tell you something right there, doesn't it? We know Jack just fell off the boat. Help! Jack plunged down into the sea. The water was freezing cold. He bobbed back up to the surface, choking and coughing. The life vest kept Jack afloat, but the waves kept hammering him. Help! Jack shouted. Thoughts of the 20-foot tiger shark and the mysterious monster shot through his mind. Help! Help! He screamed. And Jack heard someone else screaming, Help! It was Annie. She'd been washed off the ship too. Jack flailed his arms and kicked his legs, trying to get to Annie. A wave lifted her up and tossed her toward him, but just as Jack reached out to grab for her hand, another wave pushed her past him and out of reach. The wand, Jack, Annie shouted. Use the wand. The wand, Jack thought. The wand of Dianthus. Where was it? In his backpack? He didn't have his backpack. Where was his backpack? Jack, the wand, Annie yelled. I don't have it, Jack shouted. His voice was lost in the roar of the storm. Jack kept flailing and kicking, trying to reach Annie again. Jack felt his cork life vest coming loose, and another wave crashed over him, and one side of the vest slipped off his arm. Jack clutched the vest, trying to keep it on, but the waters kept pulling and tugging. The sea itself now seemed like a monster. Pause here. Remember they had been wondering about the mysterious monster that might be lurking in the sea? Well, now it says the sea itself seemed like the monster. Do you think that's the monster they were talking about? Or do you think maybe there's a second monster that they initially were talking about? I wonder. Let's find out. And what do you think it might be? As Jack desperately fought the water, he saw another life vest floating free on the waves. It was Annie's. Where was she? Annie! Jack screamed. As he looked around, he lost his fight with the sea, and a wave washed his vest right off of him. And then another wave crashed down on his head and pushed him down into the deep. Jack held his breath as he plunged through the black water. He thrashed his arms and kicked his legs, trying to get back to the surface. His head bopped above the waves, and he took one deep gulp of air before another wave washed over him and he went under again. Jack kept kicking and screaming and trying to swim, but the fight to get back to the surface was too great. Just when he was about to run out of air, he felt something curl around his waist. He felt himself being lifted toward the surface, and Jack's head popped above the water again, and he opened his mouth and gasped for air. And the waves were swirling and foamy, but Jack kept his head above them. Something around his waist was holding him up. Do you guys have any idea what that something might be? Jack couldn't think at first. He was trying too hard to breathe. But then he saw something spreading across the water near him. It looked like a giant gray umbrella with dark spots all over it, and rising from the center of the umbrella was a huge, rounded head. It had yellow eyes with black pupils, and stretching out from the umbrella were tentacles, lots of tentacles, all connected by a thick web with double rows of suckers on each side. What is it? Do you know? A giant octopus, Jack thought with horror. It was much bigger than the octopus they'd seen a long time ago, and this time a tentacle of the huge creature was curling around his waist. "Help!" shrieked Jack, and he tried to pull himself free from the thick, rubbery arm, and the giant octopus held him tightly. Jack looked around wildly. Where was Annie? "Jack!" Annie shouted, and Jack saw her. One of the octopus tentacles had lifted Annie above the surface of the water, too. Jack's relief at seeing Annie was matched by his terror. "We're caught!" he cried. "Try to escape!" Jack kept trying to break free of the huge tentacle, but the more he fought, the tighter the grip of the octopus became. "Don't fight him, Jack!" Annie yelled. "He's rescuing us!" Jack couldn't think straight. Was she crazy? "He'll strangle us and pull us back under," he shouted. "We have to fight him." "No," shouted Annie. "You're wrong. Can't you see? He's saving us from drowning." "He is?" thought Jack. Jack tried not to panic. The octopus arm around his middle felt firm, but he could tell that it wasn't trying to strangle him. It actually felt like it was hugging him, circling him like an inner tube, holding him above the water. So what do you think? Is the octopus friend or foe? Jack saw the creature's huge yellow eyes fixed on him, and as Jack stared back into his eyes, he knew what Annie was saying was true. The creature wasn't trying to hurt him. Instead, the octopus looked concerned, looked curious too, and even a little shy. Staring back into the eyes of the octopus, Jack found himself smiling. As he and Annie kept bobbing up and down in the arms of the octopus, all of Jack's fears vanished. This was the weirdest rescue he had ever experienced. You ever experienced a rescue like that? I haven't. I hope never to have to either. "Hi, you," Annie said to the octopus. "We come in peace." Jack felt so dazed he started laughing, and Annie laughed too. Even the octopus looked amused. Their laughter was interrupted by the blare of a horn. Jack heard men shrieking and shouting, and he looked up and saw the HSM Challenger heading toward them. Oh, what's going to happen next? Okay, so did you hear your vocabulary word? Go back into your text and look for it, and watch for your answers in all your questions and see if you can find, remember you want to refer back to the text to support your answer. So there we go. Tomorrow, Chapter 8.